So we're only going to talk about parallel teaching today, station teaching, and alternative teaching for the rest of today, because we know the others have little to no impact on our instruction and are only appropriate in a very small percentage of the time that we teach. So rather than focusing on the ones that are not effective, let's just spend our time thinking about the ones that we know are most effective. So let's do a little activity. And if you can get to your on your screen, I'm going to let you just give me a thumbs up or thumbs down, and I'm going to let you all answer this. This is kind of a quiz now on co-teaching. So I'm going to give you one right now. So what do you think, if it's true or false? So give me a thumbs up if it's true, or a thumbs down if it's false, or just type it in the chat if you want to. But I'm going to put this one. Co-teaching is whenever two adults are in the classroom. Is that true or false? Okay, I see a false. I see a thumbs down. I'll see some in the chat. Yep, false, false. Great. You guys are doing a great job. False. Good. Right. So those of you that answered false, you're correct. It is false. Because what we say is, just because two teachers are in the classroom, just because two adults are in the classroom, doesn't mean that they're both teaching. So good job on that one. And I'm going to move a little quicker on this one. All right, number two, try this one. When you say co-teach, you mean that two teachers are in the room daily. That's okay, Renee. So when you say co-teach, you mean that two teachers are in the room daily. Is that true or false? False. Yep, false. That's right. Just because two adults are in the room or two teachers are in the room, that's not co-teaching. In order to constitute or to meet the definition of co-teaching, both teachers need to be working with students and delivering instruction. All right. Number three, you guys are doing good. We've got 100% so far. All right. Co-teaching is a strategy you can use for differentiating instruction. Could you use co-teaching as a strategy? I'll see a thumbs up, Caitlin. Yep, Ben. Oh, I see Renee and Tanya. Good job. All right. So yeah, co-teaching can be a way that we could differentiate instruction. We're creating smaller groups if we're thinking about through station teaching or through parallel teaching or even alternative teaching. We're making smaller groups. We're thinking about how we give different levels of support to students, and then we're moving those students through there with those extra supports. Absolutely. You guys got 100% so far. All right. True or false? Co-teaching cannot be used to support students with disabilities. Cannot. So it might be a trick question. That might be trick, right? False. You can use that. That's exactly what co-teaching was for, is to support students with disability, to meet their need. Excuse me. The next one, we got one more. One teach, one observe is the best practice in co-teaching. All right. We've had 100% so far on these as well. So one teach, one observe is not the best practice in co-teaching. As a matter of fact, it probably is the most common one we use, but it's the least effective. So you guys did great on that. All right, let's take a look at station teaching. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what that looks like. So station teaching is when you divide your content into different parts and the students rotate, and that you have a teacher facilitating at least two stations. So if you can see on the screen up here, on the right side of my screen, you see the station teaching. You have three stations set up. Two of those stations, you see the circles, those indicate that teachers are leading those. So you have two teacher-led stations, and then you have an independent workstation. In the independent workstation, you would want that to be something students could do on their own. It could be something that you've already taught and then you want them to practice and review. So that's an opportunity for you to use station teaching. Now, when we think about station teaching, let's say we're going to use one for science. So here's an example for a science lesson. I'm going to give you just 1 minute to look at the screen and kind of review this, and then we're going to talk about it. Okay, so let's say we have this scenario. We're going to set up a science, and if we were practicing this in person or in a PLC, we would have two teachers come together and talk about how we would create the science lesson with having students rotate through creating science fair projects. So the first thing we would do is we would prepare, we would get our handouts ready. We would think about what's the learning target or the learning intention for that day. What materials are we going to need? How are we going to score, or what rubric are we going to use? Are we going to use devices, or what materials and resources might we need? So then we're going to set up a station, right? So one teacher might take this station that would be an experiment setup and testing. So when maybe you're conducting an experiment, while the other teacher might be working on science fair ideas or projects. So they're working on idea development. And then another station might be the research station. They're actually doing, they're conducting the actual research. And so I can give you an example of one I just used in a lesson for a science station. Is I had one teacher leading the experiment, and we used cranberries, and we were measuring buoyancy of cranberries. So the research and the students were required to log the research, and so they were measuring buoyancy if you added salt to a water, a cup of water, to measure whether or not the cranberries floated. Right. So one teacher was leading another station, and they were working on the preparing for it, understanding buoyancy. So they had a lesson on that. There was another lesson on about volume, right? So there's all kinds. So you can divide your content up. But the idea with stations is that each teacher's leading something. When you don't use stations if you're teaching something that has to be in a sequential order, like you're teaching the scientific method and it has to be step 1, step 2, step 3. But any content that you can divide into sections and have students work on is absolutely okay to use in a station teaching lesson. The thing you want to think about when you do station teaching is how can you use the classroom? What's the classroom look like for you? Are you going to, if let's say you're choosing co-teaching, how are you going to get together and plan your lesson? Because, special education teachers are in and out of the classrooms all day long, and they may be serving multiple grades. So you want to think about it. How do I work with the special ed teacher? What's our plan, our routine? Are we going to have students rotate? Are we going to spend 15 minutes? And at the timer, are we going to use a timer? What's the rules that we have to, we have a 1 minute warning, or we have to clean up our station to move to the next station, or how are we going to manage all of those things? So those are things that you want to think about and quickly put together. And it doesn't take lots and lots of time to plan those lessons. And we're going to practice one here in just a minute. But what you want to think about is how can you break that content into some smaller pieces, and then how can each of you lead that station? Because if you have a group of, let's say you have a class of 25, you move 8, and maybe 9, or across through those different stations, that makes it much smaller group to work with. And so what we just learned and talked about a few minutes ago was that kids that have disabilities need many more opportunities to practice, and you give them feedback. And it's a lot easier to give feedback to a group of students in a small group than it is a whole group of 25, right? So that makes it a little bit more manageable for us. So let's stop right there before we go any further and see, does anybody have any questions about co-teaching using station teaching? I don't see any. Pam, you just let me know if anybody has any in the chat. Okay. Okay. Now let's talk about parallel teaching. So parallel teaching, again, is probably that and station teaching are probably the most effective. So you use parallel teaching, and I'll advance to the next slide. Parallel teaching when you divide students into two groups. And so both of you, both teachers, the regular ed teacher and the special ed teacher, are teaching the same learning intention. You're still teaching the same target, but you may use two different methods for teaching that content, right? You may deliver it in a couple, both of you all may have just a little different way to deliver it. For example, I was in a third grade reading classroom, and the special education teacher had all the students, and they were turned to the back of the room, and she was using chart paper, and they were working on a plot diagram in a reading class. So the other teacher was working on the story sequence and things that happen through the story, and they were both working on the same targets, but they were using, one was using a whiteboard, one was using chart paper. Some might have graphic organizers for kids to use to help them, right? You may have some that just need a little bit more of scaffold, right? So there's different ways that you can do that. Some kids are visual learners, and you use a lot of charts and graphs and things in the class for kids to use. You may have a lot of students that are kinesthetic, and you may be using sand trays or letter tiles or calculators. There's all kinds of different things, or math manipulatives. So you think about it when two teachers come together and you say, okay, let's divide this groups. You can do that a couple different ways. You can divide that by the needs of the student. Sometimes you can divide the room down the middle. Just thinking about how we have different ways that kids can be grouped without the same kids being in the group all the time. I taught down the hallway with a lady that taught social studies, and all of the special education students sat in the back of the room with the instructional assistant. And that's where they stayed every single day. So they never spent any time integrated into the general ed, the conversations. They weren't part of the groups. They were in the back of the room, and there was an instructional assistant that would read them the content or get them access to the content, but they never had opportunity to engage. And so everybody knew who the students with disabilities were because they were in the back of the room, and you could see that little group of kids. And the idea is that we never want to isolate any of our groups to just being the students with disabilities, right? Unless there might be times when you have to do some small group pullout or some reteaching, and it might have a large number of those students in it. Or you think about the delivery and how kids learn best, you might have them divided, but you wouldn't ever want them to be just divided up by if they had a disability or not. So parallel teaching is a good way to do that. And like I said, you might choose different ways to divide your group depending on what you're teaching, what manipulatives or resources you're using. If you're working in the social studies classroom and you're thinking about, if you're doing primary sources, whatever it is, you're thinking about how you need to give access, then you can consider the ways that you group students. But I would just say, make sure that those are not just the students with disabilities always grouped together all the time. So here's an example. So if I was I would give students this particular text, and this is just an excerpt from a text that I pulled, because I think we said sixth grade, I believe. A lot of kids I think sixth grade, somewhere in the middle school. And so let's say we're going to use this as our lesson. So this is our piece of text. We're going to kind of practice this one together. So you get this piece of text, and we're going to go to the next slide. We're going to think about, for the sixth grade, we're going to determine a central idea of a text and how it's conveyed through details. And so then we're going to summarize. So if we're parallel teaching, that's what our learning intent, that's our standard. And so we're going to identify central ideas and then summarize text. So you may have, two teachers are going to decide what am I going to use with my group in this parallel teaching example. So I might use a graphic organizer, and I might have one that identifies, at the top it has the central idea and then 3 supporting details and then a summary. I might use that kind of graphic organizer. I might have guiding questions that help kids to scaffold that. I may have to break that into just central idea, or because, central idea and summarizing text, that's a lot. That's 2 skills that kids have to be able to do. So I may think about how can I scaffold that out so that I don't give them all of that in that one in that one setting. So let's say we were thinking about, that's what we're going to read. Well, I think Bridges to Terabithia, and I think I said that correctly. And let's say we're going to work on central idea and summarizing. So let's say you have this excerpt of this text, and one teacher starts and they begin reading that article. So they can popcorn read. Sometimes they do that. Maybe they do choral reading. Maybe they do echo reading, whatever strategy it is that they're going to give kids access to. So the same thing, we're going to use, maybe the second group is going to have a graphic organizer, but maybe it has a little different look to it. Maybe it's just a little bit different, or maybe it breaks it down, or maybe it's a simplified version of that. Maybe it has some more images in there. But we would have kids work through that. So the teacher, let's say if there's 25 students, one teacher's got, let's say one teacher's got 15 and one's got, let's see what I said, 12 and 13, right? So one teacher's got 12 in their group and one teacher's got 13 in their group. As the teacher, you would have the liberty to design that lesson and think about how are you going to deliver this? Because you may have a strategy or skill that you know is really good for kids in order to be able to do central idea. And so you use that strategy. And then the other teacher may use, like I said, more visuals, more access. Maybe the way they read is different. Because remember, we may have some kids that need access, that have a disability and need a reader. So we think about those things when we're planning. But both teachers have a group, right? So you can imagine that that is always better when you have smaller groups and both teachers are directly instructing kids. Because I think sometimes, I teach a lesson and somebody had an idea that was different than mine, or particularly in math. Let's say I'm solving a math problem and somebody else knows another way to solve that math problem and they can demonstrate that. They may be able to use manipulatives better. And students with disabilities in mathematics really have a hard time with concrete, like seeing things. So maybe we have to build concrete models. So we have those at that station. I saw this station teaching an excellent model of this in a high school algebra class, right? One teacher in the front, they both had whiteboards, and one teacher was using fractional part. They were working on, I guess, one-step equations. And the other teacher had some different examples and some models in the back. And then the kids had different kinds of resources back there. So, and I think they maybe had like a visual. So there's all kinds of things, maybe a step-by-step, maybe it's kind of a task analysis thing or something. But they were teaching the same thing, but they were using different resources to teach it. The whole idea is that make sure that we're really just getting to that learning intention and making sure that kids can master that target. All right. Any questions? I'll stop right there at the parallel teaching. Does anybody have any questions about that one? Okay. So I'm gonna give you just a little bit more information. And so alternative teaching, it's the third one. And alternative teaching is one of my favorite ones also. When you think about the ranking of what is the most effective, station teaching is most effective, parallel teaching, and then alternative teaching. So some districts have you choose parallel and station, but alternative teaching is a fantastic way to be able to get some information to kids. So I'm going to share that with you just a little bit. So if you can see on this screen, in the alternative teaching approach, you have one teacher that leads this large group, and then you have another teacher that pulls a group back to the smaller table. And so this can happen. It doesn't matter which teacher's teaching at which station. So I'll give you some ideas on this one. Let's say you're working on your bell ringer, or let's say you taught the lesson on Thursday. Let's say today's lesson, we taught our lesson and our exit slip indicated that we had about 8 students that didn't demonstrate mastery of the learning intention for that day. And so we want to have those students come back in the next day, and one of the teachers says, okay, while we're working on the bell ringer, the other teacher is going to pull those students back to the teacher table or the teacher station and reteach a lesson. Reteach using something else, give them some more practice. So alternative teaching can be used for reteaching. It can also be used for pre-teaching, right? I think about the complex vocabulary and the tiered vocabulary we have in our content areas, and think about how good it would be as if you could pre-teach that. If you could do some, you think about how difficult science content is, or the science vocabulary, or the math vocabulary, but you could pre-teach some skills before the actual lesson, and while the other group is working on, they're finishing their task, right? And you're pre-teaching because you are preparing them for what's upcoming. So you can use alternative teaching for reteaching, pre-teaching, but also those gifted students that we don't always are able to figure out how to reach. You can actually use the alternative teaching for enrichment or extending that lesson. So let's say in the alternative teaching, the special education teacher is working with the group and they're working on some problems. They're solving math problems they're solving for the day, while the other teacher is giving the students that are gifted, or the advanced students, they're giving them some enrichment. They're doing something with them to extend that lesson, to increase their level of rigor or higher order thinking. And so that is very easily done as long as both teachers are in there and is allowed, gives them that opportunity to tailor that to those groups. So alternative teaching is a great way to do that. And I always use this example. So let's say on alternative teaching, say all groups, maybe you teach a unit on fractions using the area model, and you're teaching that and you're having them multiply fractions, and you're letting them practice on that. Well, you see that there's some students that are struggling with area model. An area model you can draw on chart paper or on the board, and it's a semi-concrete model. So kids can see it, but it's not concrete. They can't touch it. But those kids that are really struggling with it, let's say we pull them to the alternative teaching, using the alternative teaching model, and we use fraction strips, or we build fractional parts with cubes, right, with the fraction cubes or the fraction bars. But we give them that concrete model, and then we teach them how to solve problems with fractions using that. So everybody's still working toward the same target, but the students that are in the back might have needed that concrete representation, and they are getting that from the special ed teacher or the regular ed teacher, while the rest of the students are solving the problems. So that's a real quick and easy way to think about how we can reteach and how we can make that happen in that classroom. That's also a great way to progress monitor. Let's say you've got a referral and you're trying to work with students and you're checking their learning, you're collecting data. One of you could be assessing students and working with them in that small group, while the rest of the group continues on with the lesson. That's a way that you can use both teachers very, very efficiently and effectively in that classroom setting. All right, so we're going to practice one together. All right, so let's do this one together. So this is our standard. We're going to determine, this is the standard is that let's focus on the ninth grade. So this is ninth grade reading for information standard. And we're saying that we want to determine a central idea of a text and analyze in detail the development over the course of the text, including how they emerge and are shaped and refined by specific details. So that's a pretty big standard, but it's really asking us to do a few things within that, right? It's asking us to do central idea. We're going to analyze details and how over the course of the text and how that impacts things that happen within the text, right? And identify details. So there are multiple pieces within this standard that are some skills that kids need, right? Central idea is a specific skill. Analyzing text, looking at the development over the course of the text. That's some specific skills. So we're going to practice now on this one. If that's what you're going to do, let's say you had that one. So your job is to, let's say you're doing a characterization, because we said central idea and then how characters change over the course of the text. So if we have to explain scientific, historical, or technical information. So let's say we have these things. Let's say we're going to talk about how a character changes over the course of the text. How would we divide this up into 3 sections if you were wanting to think about the relationship or interaction between individuals, events, or ideas in some kind of text? right? Because we're still thinking about central idea. We're thinking about how characters change. What would you put in station one? What would you have the regular ed teacher do? You can either type it in the chat, you can unmute, but what do you think would be a good task for the regular ed teacher to be doing for this standard or this target? Feel free to unmute if you want to, or drop it in the chat. Yeah. So, all right. So Madison says determining the central idea. That's great, Madison. Okay. So you want to have the regular ed teacher working on this, how do you determine the central idea? Okay. That's perfect. Okay. Station two, what do you want the special ed teacher to be doing right there? Because you're trying to decide what. Identifying the details. Okay. So you could have, thanks, Madison, you could have the special education teacher taking that text and looking at details, right? What are the details that um, support the central idea? You could do that, absolutely. Any other ideas about what you could do? You could absolutely graphic organizer. So one of them could be using a graphic organizer. You could be looking at relationships or interaction between individuals or something that's in the story. Absolutely. Well, when you think about it, sometimes the special instruction or the specially designed instruction that we say students with disabilities get is using a graphic organizer. Well, that's exactly how we get that specially designed instruction integrated into that lesson. We're teaching them how to organize content. We may have to give them a little bit of support with that. We may have to give them part of the answer and let them fill in the rest of the blank. But there's ways that we can give them, we can teach them how to use that organizer so that they can be successful in the future when they're working on identifying ideas or using that organizer to summarize or to think about text. What do you think would be a good station, an independent station? Because we're talking about ninth grade. So what would be a good independent station that you could have students be working on? It'd be something you've already taught, something they could do on their own. What could they do in that independent station? Any ideas? Did any of you all use? You could have them do a writing. You could have them do an illustration if it was kids that needed, depending on their age, you could have them respond to something in writing. You could have them, if they're smaller kids, it could be, they could draw something to represent that. You're working on how people interact, right? There's also a piece of that is how do you interact or ideas. So you could use some computer-based. Yep. So Madison says an extra opportunity for practicing what they learned. Yep. They could do a graphic organizer on their own. Absolutely. You could have them having use something with the text and they could listen to parts of the story or identify sections of the story. Absolutely. You could use any kind of opportunity, like Madison said, for practicing what they've learned. You're going to reinforce skills there. So if it's something that you've already taught, and you can have them practice that. It just needs to be something in that third station that you have already taught and they can do it independently. Otherwise, they're going to have trouble working on their own. And so you could have think about when you group your students, you could have a peer that could help facilitate that lead that or help facilitate that station as well. So there's all kinds of things you could connect that with. You could connect it with reading or writing. You could connect it with some, another piece of text. You could use IXL. You can use all kinds of different technology, vocabulary practice. You could have an independent vocabulary lesson that you could talk about some of the vocabulary that was in the text. and they can be working on their vocabulary notebook. So there's all kinds of things that you can include. But what happens is both teachers then are leading that station and they're facilitating that. So that means two teachers are working with groups of students the whole entire class, and the kids are moving. So that allows for movement, it allows for engagement, it allows for some much smaller groups and some more direct participation and some quick feedback and if you reteach whatever you might need in those small groups. So it's a good, quick, easy way to practice that. All right, so you did really well on that. So again, back to thinking about it. You as the regular ed teacher, talking to the special ed teacher, think about how can you guys do these? Can you choose one of the co-teaching strategies and practice those? Pick which one you want to use. You don't have to try all three. And that's one of the things that we've learned is don't try them all at one time, but choose one and practice it with your co-teacher. See how it works. How can you find a time to plan? Do you have some common planning? What are your procedures going to be? Because you're going to have to teach students what those procedures are in that co-teaching setting. So those are all things to think about. And I think that's it. And so we're not going to get to that part, I don't think, Miss Pam, today, because I think we're right at the 4:30, and we were going to try to give folks opportunity to get home and out of the weather. So
yeah,
I'm going to I'll stop right there and I'll turn that back over to you.
yes. Isn't she wonderful? I just love to hear all of her ideas. I hope that you got a lot of ideas today. I'm going to drop some things into your participant folder. And we do need you to complete a feedback form so that you can get your certificate back to you. Also, Miss Dion had a sign in at the very beginning, and we need to complete that for her because she'll need that. So I'll go ahead and get the feedback form into the chat, but please fill this out for Dr. Bates. Dion, do you want to go ahead and drop that back or pull up that slide?
Yep, that's what I'm going to do right now. I'm going to drop that in there for them really quickly so they'll have it.
Okay.
All right. And if I had any questions as we're finishing up, do you have any questions? That's a lot of information to take in. So as you think of questions too, you can let us know. But any questions?
Thank you for participating today. A lot of good participation. We really appreciate when you do that and just join in there. But this is your network. So the next time we will have Alex, and Alex will be Alex Smith from the Holler. He will be joining us, and he will be bringing some AI ideas to us. So that's going to be an exciting session. So I can't wait for that. We have, let's see, just a second. I'll share this with you while you're finishing up that. Or Dion, did you have that slide? I'm sorry.
No, I just dropped it in the chat for
Okay.
anyone that might need it.
Okay. So on on January the 16th will be our next meeting. We will not be meeting in December. So just remember that. So our next time that we'll be together will be January the 16th. And we hope that you all have a very, very happy Thanksgiving and Merry Christmas. If you need us, we're always here. Dr. Bates and myself, we're always here at KVEC. If you need anything, please let us know. But go ahead and fill that out and feel free to hop off and be safe traveling home today. Thank you so much.